So PatrickBurns has joined our conversation. Posted a couple videos in response to inmendham, um, trying to sympathize, I think, and certainly to legitimize the type of perspective that Gary has on life, because there certainly does appear to be a lot of evidence to support um, that particular point of view. I mean, Gary said it. We already live in this virtual world, and we accept it, even though there's still all this suffering going on in order to support it. When we could, at least hypothetically, if technology advances to this point, completely virtualize reality so that it was just a brain in a vat having an experience of whatever it wanted, um, then there'd be a lot less suffering, and all around existence, human existence, would be a better thing. Um, but I think also, Patrick, you're kind of trying to get at the root of what suffering is, not just in Gary, but in anybody. Um, you know, the Alan Watts that you played, even if we had complete control over everything, conscious control, even if we were God of our own virtual universe, so to speak, we wouldn't really know what to do with ourselves. I mean, we'd stay busy for a few days or however long, but then eventually we'd want to do exactly what we're doing now, which is not have control. That's the ultimate dream, the ultimate fantasy. So virtual reality just doesn't really get us out of the predicament of existing. To exist is to have an unconscious, and that is the spice of life. Without it, without the unknown, there's no point. But I'm going to read some Alan Watts too, because it's certainly relevant to this discussion. From Nature, Man, and Woman, from the chapter Science and Nature. Understanding nature by means of thought is like trying to make out the contours of an enormous cave with the aid of a small flashlight casting a bright but very thin beam. The path of the light and the series of spots over which it has passed must be retained in memory, and from this record the general appearance of the cave must be laboriously reconstructed. In practice, then, the scientist must perforce use his intuition for grasping the wholes of nature, though he does not trust it. He must always stop to check intuitive insight with the thin, bright beam of analytic thought. For intuition can so easily be wrong, just as the organic intelligence which regulates the body without thought cannot always be relied upon to avoid the mistakes of congenital deformity or cancer, nor to control instincts which, under special circumstances, lead directly to destruction. Thus it is natural enough and healthy enough to want to reproduce the species, but the reproductive urge cannot be relied upon to keep a watch on the environment and automatically check itself when the food supply is insufficient. Hence the only way of correcting the errors of intuition or unconscious intelligence seems to be by the laborious work of analysis and experiment. But this involves an interference with the natural order from the start, and the wisdom of this interference cannot be known until its work is well advanced. Therefore, the scientist has to ask himself whether the mistakes of nature are really mistakes. Does a species destroy itself in the interests of the natural order as a whole, in the sense that if it did not do so, life would be intolerable for all, including itself? Are errors of congenital disease, or of epidemics or pestilence, necessary for maintaining a balance of life? Will correction of these errors give rise in the long run to far more serious problems than the ones it has solved? And will the solution of those problems in turn create ever more fantastic difficulties? Must unconscious intelligence every so often be wrong, lest, if it were always right, the species would be too successful and again upset the balance? On the other hand, he may ask whether the birth of conscious analysis is not itself an act of unconscious intelligence. Is conscious interference with nature actually quite natural, in the sense that it is still working in the interests of the natural order as a whole, even if it is going to involve the elimination of man? Or may it be that in pushing conscious analysis just as far as we can, we shall discover means of enabling the unconscious intelligence to be far more effective? The difficulty with all these questions is that we can hardly find out the answers until it is too late to make use of them. What, furthermore, will be the test of doing the right thing? What, in other words, is the good of the natural order as a whole? The usual answer to the problem of what is good for any or all species is simply survival. Science is mainly interested in prediction because it assumes that the chief good of humanity is to continue into the future. The difficulty with all these questions is that we can hardly find out the answers until it is too late to make use of them. What, furthermore, will be the test of doing the right thing? What, in other words, is the good of the natural order as a whole? The answer to the problem of what is good for any or all species is simply survival. Science is mainly interested in prediction because it assumes that the chief good of humanity is to continue into the future. This is likewise the test of almost all practical action. It has survival value. Accepting this premise, that the good of life through time, and assuming that such perpetuation must be pleasant for it to go on at all, the test of whether we have done wisely is that we are still here, and seem likely to remain for as long as we can foresee. But on this assumption, the human race had survived, and seemed likely to go on surviving, for perhaps more than 1,000,000 years before the arrival of modern technology. We must, on this premise, assume that it had acted wisely thus far. We may argue that its life was not highly pleasant, but it is difficult to know what this means. The race was certainly pleased to go on living, for it did so. On the other hand, after a bare 2 centuries of industrial technology, the prospects of human survival are being quite seriously questioned. It is not unlikely that we may eat or blow ourselves off the planet. Yet surely the ideal of survival is completely inane. Studying human and animal psychology, it does indeed seem that self-preservation is the first law of nature, though it is possible that this is an anthropomorphism, a projection into nature of a peculiarly human attitude. If survival is the test of wisdom, the significance of life is merely time. We go on in order to keep going on. Our attitude to experience seems to be one of perpetual hunger, for even when we are satisfied and delighted to be alive, we keep calling for more. The cry, "Encore," is the highest mark of approval. Obviously, this is because no moment of life is a true fulfillment. Even in satisfaction, there remains a gnawing emptiness which nothing save an infinity of time can fill, for all joys want eternity. But the hunger for time is the direct result of our specialization in narrowed attention, of the mode of consciousness which takes the world in serially, one thought and one thing at a time. Each experience is, for this reason, partial, fractured, and incomplete, and no amount of these fragments ever add up to a whole experience, a true fulfillment. By and large, they attain only to the weariness of satiation, the impression that all nature, like ourselves, hungers endlessly for survival is, then, the necessary result of the way in which we study it. The answer is predetermined by the character of the question. Nature seems to be a series of unsatisfactory moments ever demanding more, because those are the terms in which we perceive it. We understand it by cutting it into pieces, assume that it is in itself this heap of fragments, and conclude that it is a system of endless incompleteness which can seek fulfillment only through everlasting addition. Thought and science are therefore raising problems which their terms of study can never answer, many of which are doubtless problems only for thought. The trisection of an angle is similarly an insoluble problem only for compass and straight-edge construction. and Achilles cannot overtake the tortoise so long as their progress is considered piecemeal, endless distance between them. However, as it is not Achilles but the method of measurement which fails to catch up with the tortoise, so it is not man but his method of thought which fails to find fulfillment in experience. This is by no means to say that science and analytic thought are useless and destructive tools, but rather that the people who use them must be greater than their tools. To be an effective scientist, one must be more than a scientist, and a philosopher must be more than a thinker. For the analytic measurement of nature tells us nothing if we cannot see nature in any other way. Thus, the scientist as scientist does not see nature at all, or rather he sees it only by means of an instrument of measurement, as if trees became visible to the carpenter only as he sawed them into planks or marked them out with his ruler.